Jamaica, this one is different. These guys are making millions of US dollars right here from Jamaica. And some of them are US millionaires from our island, from exporting to Latin America from the beautiful island of Jamaica. Their revenues are all in the billions of JMD, and they sell simple products like banana chips and lubricants for cars. But they do it at scale with wicked business insight. And we have them for the first time ever as a group talking about exporting to Latin America from the Caribbean, from the Jamaican context. Whether you are small or large, this is for you, because it's the equivalent of Bill Gates coming down and saying, hey, tech people, this is how I started and this is how you can do it too. Jeffrey Hall's JP, a Jamaican company, has over 400 employees in the DR, and they export to Panama, Costa Rica, and do many other things. He also runs one of the largest juice companies in the Netherlands, all the way up in Europe, from Jamaica. And they own ships. They own the ships that actually export the stuff to Europe. This business is crazy, but again, possible from Jamaica if you have self-belief and you watch videos like this in your own time, from the comfort of your home, with a mental notepad, so you can, basically repeat what these guys have done. Now we have Thwaites, who exports oil-based products from Jamaica to Colombia and many other places. And he's now the president of the Jamaican Manufacturers and Exporters Association, or JME for short. Then we got Nicholas Sutherland, who is the head of new markets for Latin America for Jampro. And this guy was an export manager for himself in Latin America, went to school in Colombia, and also was for Lasco and Grace. So he has a real deep insight. He's giving it away for free. Finally, we have Curtis McDowell, who was JMB's founding employee for the DR operations, that's Dominican Republic, and a consultant on many other businesses going to the Dominican Republic and Latin America. They understand how to do it to a T, and it's being made available for you for free. Give us a like and subscribe, because that's the way we're going to grow, to continue things like this. And if you have questions, just comment below. If you don't have anything else to say, just comment, I love learning about Jamaican businesses, so Jamaican people can see more educational content about businesses in Jamaica who are doing well, so they can do well too, therefore they can get richer and do business better. And again, all this here on Intelligent TV. See you later.
So gentlemen, Jeffrey, let me start with you. You are closest to me here. You have had significant market entry in LATAM with some deep roots in DAMREP now, manufacturing, production, and export. What are some of the critical factors that you would wish to share with us today for successful market entry into LATAM?
So let's talk about a couple of things. One thing I think is important to note is that LATAM is a big place. Mm-hmm. And I think Craig did an excellent job of clarifying the variety, the diversity, the scale of what we're calling LATAM.
Yes.
So we've done business in a number of different countries. We've done business in Brazil, we've done business in Colombia, in Central America, and the Spanish language Caribbean. From the perspective of a Jamaican business, it's important to take a look at Latin America and appreciate the relative scale. And this is one of the things that I thought Craig also touched on, which is if you look at Central America alone, you're talking about 50 million people. Mm-hmm. If you add Mexico, you're adding another 130 million people. The DR, by itself is materially larger than all of the English-speaking CARICOM. And of course, the largest part of CARICOM, as you might define it, would include Haiti. And so the first thing to be aware of is that LATAM is scale. And so if you're going to plan to enter, you've got to be precise, because a given amount of capital can be frittered away across a market. Mm-hmm. And so for us, precision is important. Understanding the relevant market to that which you are selling and being prepared to invest a little bit upfront to do so. I would say that if you take the view that LATAM is huge, then for many of us, capital, market reach will be a constraint, and therefore partners are going to make sense. Mm-hmm. Figuring out who can help you to get touch points across the region matters. So precision, market research, focus groups, partnerships matter. We can talk about all of these things. And then the third thing I would say is comparative advantage. Asking yourself, what are we good at? What differentiates us? It's important to realize that at different points in history, different things will be more competitive. There was a time when you might have argued that our labor costs were cheap. There are times when our relative labor costs are expensive, because many parts of Latin America have access to huge pools of labor, even beyond the country itself. So if you're doing business in the Dominican Republic, that may be a relatively well-off country, but it has access to a labor pool. And Angie can help me with the right language, but it does benefit from labor from other jurisdictions, most notably Haiti. And the same is true with the Costa Rica-Guatemala relationship. So what are you bringing to the party? Quite possibly you're not bringing cheap labor. Quite possibly you're not necessarily bringing cheap capital. Quite possibly you're not necessarily bringing scale. So it's important to understand what you are bringing. Now, we've done quite a bit of business there, and I'm happy to share a little bit about what we've thought that market has wanted from us, i.e., what were we able to bring. Some of it is because of the cultural capital that we have as a region, but a lot of it is our strength in services. And so that's a point I'd like to develop in due course.
Thanks very much, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey has talked to us about precision in entering the market, understanding the relevant market, those partnerships, and the comparative advantage. Nicholas, you're right beside Jeffrey. And I know many persons in the audience are saying, from the JAMPRO perspective, in assisting businesses in understanding the region, and as Jeffrey pointed out, it is a region of scale, in understanding the region and how to enter, what kind of support does JAMPRO provide?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the first things that we do is ask them, where are they prioritizing? So let me give some more clarity. I'm the manager who handles Latin America and the Caribbean for JAMPRO. So I lived in South America for many years in Colombia. I've worked with export with Grace, Lasco handling the Caribbean and Central America. And I also worked with Del Monte out of Guatemala exporting into the Caribbean. So I asked them, what's your focus? And Jeffrey said something which is very important. Precision is key. Look at your market. Is it going to be Panama, El Salvador, Guatemala? What do you want to accomplish? What channel is your product? Do you think it should be sold through? Then we try and connect you with some distributors or give you the names of some distributors. I saw a friend of mine here earlier. I don't know if John Mafu Jr. is here, if he's still here. John is Minister Hill earlier gave an example of John Mafu Sr. traveling. And John Mafu Jr. has continued that trend. And we have sat down in my office and he said, look, I'm going to Panama. I want my product to be in this channel. Let's see what distributors we can call and speak to. So I think it's a matter of knowing, getting an idea of where you want to be, where you think you can win, and also looking at the kind of channels that you want to go into.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nicholas. So Sydney, you thought about what channels, where you want to win. Did you pack a bag with some lubricants and head to LATAM? What was your journey like, bringing your business into LATAM?
That question didn't sound right, but I think I know where you're going. No, our experience has been a little different. So we manufacture for brands, right? So it's really, we create a relationship with our brand, and then they use us in their supply chain. And every brand is going to use us in a different way depending on their footprint in Latin America. Okay. But we have to earn the trust of the brand because they're entrusting you with their IP, their reputation, all of these things. So you have to prove that you can make an international quality, international service. You can support their brand in a certain way. You have the information systems where you can talk to them. So our experience is a little different. So we build relationships both on the customer side and the supply chain side that lead to deeper relationships and selling into LATAM.
Yeah, which is another method of us getting into LATAM, because I think sometimes we're just thinking the straight product services, bringing them into the country, but this is about trust, the reputation, ensuring that we already have those systems in place and we're able to sell them internationally. So Sydney's a little far from us though, but let me
Curtis.
Curtis. Calling Sydney again. Earlier, the minister talked about old age. Might look like it catching up with me. Curtis, you journeyed to DOMREP with JMMB. You're now an independent consultant. JMMB establishing those roots in DOMREP. Can you tell us a bit about that journey, that is a financial industry entry into the Latin American market? Tell us a bit about that journey.
Okay, so in 2005, as my background is in computer science, I'd gone away to do business administration. And so my good friend Sheldon, whose son here, Craig, put on the event. Sheldon said to me, come man, come work with me, man. I want you in technology. And it's like, Sheldon, but you know, I went, technology is my background, but I wanted to expand my horizon, do business, you know. So I studied in Spain. And then I was one day at a conference similar to this, and I got a call from Keith Duncan. And Keith said, hey, Curtis, we're thinking of going to the DOMREP and want to know if you want to come along. So I was like, sure. Because that was the opportunity I was looking for, you know. And so I came, we went, which is one of the important things. You have to visit. You can't just stay somewhere and read about a country. You have to go and actually visit and see it, because that's when you get the insight on the ground, you know. So we did that. We went to all the authorities there, the central bank, Ministry of Securities, visited a lot of people through contacts as well, because of course you go to a new country, you try and find out who do I know there. Through past alumni, you get additional contacts, insight. We visited, the board analyzed, did the reports and everything, feasibility study. You have to do your homework. It's not going to be easy, you know, made some contacts. We went, visited, and then did the feasibility studies. And then the board decided that we're going to enter. So that's how I ended up going over there. We hired somebody out of Costa Rica, a Chilean, Guillermo Arancibia, as a country manager, and that's how we started off. And it's so funny because one of the places that we visited on that trip in 2005, I remembered it. It was on the construction, one of our future partners. And in 2006, Guillermo and I were going to visit somewhere, saw the place, and I said, but this looks like the place. Mm-hmm. We went to the place, literally found the place, and those were our partners, one of the partners. And so that's how we developed the relationship. And, you know, through all the GMMB procedures, et cetera, we applied that, and little by little we grew the business.
Yes. So we're hearing a lot about relationships, we're hearing about partnerships. Jeffrey, as your business has grown globally, and you are doing business in LATAM, when you consider some of the risk management that you have to consider, the people management across the territories, what are some of those experiences that you would share with our attendees today?
Well, I think it's important to say up front that different business opportunities may call for different approaches. But the experience that we've had has been multifold. So there are circumstances in which we've done acquisitions that have had market access already available to it. There are circumstances in which we have broken new ground to enter into markets, to put products into markets. And then there are circumstances in which we have used what we're calling Latin America as a place from which to do business with the world, including with Latin America. I would say that the lessons for me along the way are that you can do business with local on-the-ground management. I think there's a perception that one needs to parachute a team from Jamaica into a new jurisdiction in order to open an office, in order to do business. That oftentimes can work. But a process of selectively interviewing good people, taking advantage of recruiting companies, of credit checks, and your own gut intuition can lead you with good people on the ground who can work for you. And I've seen the reverse also the case, where companies from Latin America come into Jamaica and benefit from outstanding Jamaican leadership on the ground. I think the partnership point has been mentioned in various ways throughout, both at the level of a kind of a comprehensive trust-based relationship that Sydney mentioned, or this kind of venturing together, as was mentioned by Curtis. We've found incredible partnerships along the way, and as many of the stories were told here are applicable for us as well, where they were fortuitous. I could regale you with examples of how we got into Costa Rica to do the banana business with partners in Panama, with the snack business where we export into that market. Again, very fortuitously found people that shared our risk appetite, shared our ethics, and that's been very important to us. Financial controls, even when you have very good partners, we've found it necessary in the business that we've done and that we've been successful at to keep a rigorous, tough external perspective on financial controls throughout the business. And maybe that's a place where we put extra effort. So we think carefully about how we're going to get real-time information to govern our enterprises if we're far away. And systems, well-developed systems, a level of formality in business, I think, allows you to expand. So if your business is currently configured in a way where it relies on you as a single-strand dependency to control every dollar in the business, I think you'll find that it may constrain you if you wish to go beyond borders. So those are a couple of examples.
Yes. So we are hearing about governance and those financial controls because one thing we're very good at in Jamaica is starting business, and we are very visionary, but as we are also seeking to go outside of Jamaica, to bear in mind that we are running businesses. So Sydney, for you, you spoke about trust and reputation. I mean, in this new time of social media and how people search for partners, as someone who has partnered in LATAM, what are some of the mechanisms for persons to find you? But those conversations that build the trust, what are some of the things that people have to bear in mind when they go into that room?
That's a good question. I think it varies by industry. I've been in my industry for 20, 25 years now and worked in various markets, North America, Europe, a lot in Asia. So it's really the same relationships. I'm creating relationships with brands. I'm creating that trust over a long time. One of the things I think we do a little differently in Latin America than some is we buy there. So we use it in our supply chain. And we find that if we buy from them, create that relationship, and then we flip it. How are you going to help me grow my business? And a lot of our new opportunities come from our suppliers. So if you're not willing to source material there and look at the value in a relationship, a lot of businesses tend to look for the cheapest price. We end up in China and other Asian countries. Are we really looking at the value of the relationship? We may pay a little more out of LATAM, we may not, but you're building a relationship that has value. So it's hard to ask somebody to buy from you if you're not buying from them.
Thank you for that. Curtis, in your experience, you would have gone into Dominican Republic with a financial institution, and you know how people are with their money, and we're coming from Jamaica. Were there considerations of rebranding, what face needed to be put forward to ensure that that trust was there in rolling out the organization?
Not really. It was just more a matter of recognizing the partners. So in the name, all partners were recognized. It was quite a mouthful for people to call, and because it was JMMB BDI America. And one of the other important points that was considered was the fact that to give some amount of reputation to the business, the fact that you're going to establish an office that's well known. At the time, it was the best mall in the Dom Rep, which was Acropolis. So you didn't need to say you need to go down this road, or you just say we're at Acropolis. Yes. So that gives a certain stability to the person to say, okay, this is a solid company. you know? And then through the partners as well, that also lends credibility.
Yes. So, Nicholas, we have many small and medium-sized enterprises in the room. Some of them provide services. So Jeffrey mentioned earlier that you do have to think of sometimes of what that initial investment is and the availability of capital, and some capital is expensive. So some of our small businesses are saying, well, is there really an opportunity for me? How do I really get in? Because I don't have any capital.
Well, services is kind of like sports. There's badminton and there's kickboxing. So I think it depends on what your service is. So for example, you're doing things like software maintenance. That's something you can do, relatively remotely. You can start off with a trip to visit some of your potential clients, let's say in the Dominican Republic or El Salvador, and then all your work from there on in doesn't really involve any logistics, as Jeffrey can tell you, can break the back of a supply chain and profits. So I think it depends on what you're doing in terms of services. Goods, manufactured goods are a lot more complex. That's the real, I would say, trench warfare of how you're going to get across to Latin America. With services, you can jump on a plane, speak with some of your potential clients, go to conferences in Latin America. There's a lot of tech conferences, especially in Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, and they're all niched. So you have shared services as opposed to KPO, as opposed to BPO, as opposed to digital services that are based around CRM services. So there's many opportunities in Latin America, especially in the larger countries, of niched and nuanced conferences and expos that you can go to. And in many cases, as Craig has mentioned and Ambassador has mentioned, many of these have a lot of people speak English. Also, there's translators. You have the earpieces to do translations, and you might be speaking with a guy. Maybe he doesn't speak English, but I guarantee you, somebody's staff will be there sitting beside him to translate for him.
Okay. Thanks a lot for that, Nicholas. So I've gotten a great opportunity to ask questions of this panel. So we have large business. We have a business that provides provides products within the supply chain. We have Nicholas from JAMPRO, and we have a consultant here who has gone into the DOM rep, Curtis. So our businesses are here. This is the keys to LATAM. So as we're trying to open the door, if we have any questions for our panel to get through that door. Any questions so far? Don't be shy. Can we?
I can probably. I just want to find out that law 171 years of the established distributor for land. Is that still in place?
Actually, Omar, there will be a... Omar.
Oh, I was asking about that law 171, I think, in the DR, where 173? Yeah, once you establish a distributor, that distributor apparently is a lifelong distributor with your company.
There will be a presentation later on that will address that.
Okay. Any more questions at this point?
And sorry, just to add one more point to what Nicholas was saying about the small businesses. Remember, Craig had mentioned as well the fact that you can apply for grants. So they should try and take that up, send a shipment or whatever it may be that they're trying to produce to see how the market receives it. So you have those opportunities that he mentioned that are not being taken up by the small. So I think that's a good opportunity.
Okay. Thanks for that, Curtis. Nicholas, you're making another point?
A little clarity to Omar and his question. This is a highlight. The short answer is yes, it's still in effect. But the longer, more nuanced answer, which is very beneficial to Jamaica, is that they have made some exceptions to the law for CARICOM countries. And you have to kind of touch certain bases and certain steps to make it not applicable. So that presenter, or whoever is presenting on that, will tell you how to go about that process, which has to be collaborative between you and the distributor, so it is not applicable to you. But I just want to highlight that the work of CARICOM countries, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and working with the Dominican Republic, that no other country or trading group in the world has an exception to Law 173, except for CARICOM. And that was put into place, I want to say, about 5.5 years ago.
Jeffrey, you're going to make an additional point?
So I just wanted to underscore the point that Sydney was making about the importance of taking a view as to how you can trade with partners. You know, I just think that for people who, for some reason, Rochelle is labeling the enterprise I'm associated with as a big business. And but I think of it very much as a collection of smaller businesses that have had to be very entrepreneurial along the journey of life and business. And so, you know, I would say for people in this room who want to identify with parts of that experience, just challenging yourself to get out there pretty quickly with a view that people will identify with what you're trying to do if you find yourself in forums in which business is being done. You know, I definitely don't think that the opportunity that Craig outlined and that gathered all of us here today is going to be achieved by individuals sitting in Kingston and talking about it, even though that's a part of the process. I think the next step is going to be for individuals to get out there. And I certainly, frankly, when I look back on the last 20-something years of doing business in Latin America, the me that I am now thinks the decisions that we took back then were ridiculous and way too risky. My risk appetite is a lot lower than it was when I was, you know, opening the back of the container in the Dominican Republic to unload our first fryer. You know, the DR is a very interesting place. When I started doing business there in early 2000s, the per capita GDP of the DR might have been 2,400 USD. And Jamaica at that time was about 3,600. So Jamaica was richer on a per capita basis in the DR. Fast forward 20 years, and the DR's per capita GDP is 8,400-ish, and Jamaica is 5,300-ish. So they have leapfrogged us in that period. And if you looked at Santo Domingo today versus 20 years ago, I mean, they would have had power outages that have been resolved. They now have a modern subway system. And people, you know, like JMB and others have been able to participate in that growth story. Frankly, that growth story has been internal to the DR, but a big part of it has been external and investment-led. And there's a sense in Jamaica that this is our moment. But the four corners of Jamaica will not be big enough to contain the kind of growth agenda that we would have for ourselves. And so I encourage business people to make that step to position themselves in forums that are open to trade, which I think importantly includes both ways.
Thank you for that, Jeffrey. I see you nodding, Sydney. What would you add to what Jeffrey's saying, or what other perspective would you give in advising our business people here today?
No, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The business is less transactional and more a relationship. So there are places you can have transactional relationships, and we know where those are. But that's not, in my opinion and in my experience, it's going to be hard to find those types of opportunities that they're just a transactional experience. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a give and take, and it's going to be kind of navigating what your business done, what we do well, what the opportunity is. Having a local partner, I think, is key, and being a bit of a collaborative type of way of doing businesses. A lot of Jamaicans aren't. That's not our natural place. But I've found on our supply chain, we collaborate to the benefit of everybody with our buyers out of Colombia, out of Domrep, here in Kingston. So all of us are more competitive in the region. So at some point, you just kind of have to step back from your individual business and say, okay, let's build the region.
Let's build the region. Curtis, what would you like to add to this part of the discussion?
Well, one of the things that I'd say is key in building these relationships, that you have to try and find the right person. Because, you know, you're going into a new country, you have to be able to, somebody who is sociable, somebody who is able to perform in the way that you're going to expect to reflect your brand, etc. Because it doesn't make sense you send somebody who's, not very sociable when the business requires you to be. I'm not naturally sociable, but at the same time, on a one-on-one basis, you get to meet people, you develop the relationships, and in that way, it progresses so much so that, like 15 years later, I still have a lot of good friends in different business that I'm not even related with now, and that's also if somebody wants to have, I need this type of product. It's just a matter of trying to see who I know or who you can connect the person to, and you still have those relationships, and it helps you to grow the business in that way. So.
Yes. Thanks for that, Curtis, because it's funny, earlier in Craig's presentation, as he gave that historical perspective and just some of the relations that we currently have and the background, we recognize too that with all the business acumen, we still have to be aware of relationships, how to build those relationships, how to build the trust, and how to build our reputation in these markets. And that is just as important as the business acumen. In fact, it's a big part of the business acumen. Nicholas, I know you want to make a point, and I want to ask you, while you're making that point, is JAMPRO ready when the persons in this room and online say we are ready to do business in LATAM? We need some help from JAMPRO. Is JAMPRO ready?
We're ready to assist them. One of the things I wanted to touch on, and Sydney talked about it in terms of collaboration. Let's say you're looking to go into Colombia with a food product, and that's my background, so I'm going to stick with that part. And you know that Lasco imports powdered sugar out of Colombia. You could reach out to somebody at Lasco and say, look, who's your supplier? Because I want to go into Colombia with my product. My product is fruitcake. That manufacturer has clients in Colombia. I have a relationship with him as a Lasco person. I speak to my supplier and said, can you speak to this gentleman? He wants to sell cakes into Colombia. Can you have a conversation, recommend some distributors who have regional reach, national reach? As those of us who come out to the food industry and export know, you do have some distributors who are great at selling, but not great at brand building. They can take you from 60 to 100 miles per hour, but they can't take you from 0 to 60. There's a lot of moving parts around distributors, and they can recommend who's a good distributor, who has a lot of strength in, let's call it mom and pops. They have a good route to market. But if you want to go into institutional sales, they don't really handle that part. So there's a lot of things you can do. I remember when I was with Lasco, one of the things we did was we sync on ourselves, share the container every 2 months to St. Vincent. We had the same distributor. And instead of sending a 3/4 full or half full container, we decided to get together. We had no conflict in our products, in our range of products. And we shared the cost of a container going down to St. Vincent every 2 months. And I think that's where Jamaican companies can learn to speak with their colleagues, especially if there's no conflict. Who do you buy from in Costa Rica? Do you buy chemicals? Could I talk to that person and have them give me a perspective on who's a great ice cream distributor? Use those relationships, and I think you'll find a lot of advice is given to you without a vested interest.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. So as we wrap up the panel, oh, this is a question? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Shepherd Carter, and I love that it was mentioned a while about the food cake. Now, thank you. My name is Shepherd Carter. Good afternoon. I love what you mentioned about the fruit cake just now. As a chef myself and as a caterer, I would love to know, how do I get into those markets in terms of marketing my food, not just packaged goods, but the actual cooked food itself? How do I do that?
Well, again, let me just jump and say that every country has different phytosanitary requirements. That's one of the challenges around Latin America. The food entry requirements for Colombia are totally different from Chile. So it really depends on what category your food is. You mentioned cooked. Is it packaged? Is it freeze-dried? Does it have an IQF application? your shelf life kind of speaks to that. If you're doing cooked meats, for example, unless it's canned, you're not going to get it into most countries in Latin America if it's fresh. So it's a longer conversation because food, again, like sports, badminton, Thai boxing, depends on the application and the country's phytosanitary rules. So I can give you an expanded answer after when I have a little more detail.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. Any other questions from the audience? Emperor.
Exporters here today. How do we get you? How do you answer the phone? How do we book our meeting?
Hi, Empress. It's been a while since we've spoken. So nice to see you again. No pressure. No, reach out to us. Tell us what you're interested in. We have an agribusiness team that's focused on export. As I mentioned before, I sit as one of the regional managers. We have an office in New York. We have one in London. I sit here as the regional manager for Latin America and the Caribbean and some other a few Asian markets for investment. And we do our best to kind of help you identify what you're looking for. Where is your interest? Is it a good idea? And see where we can connect you with distributors based on what your product is.
We have another question.
Well, I kind of joined late, so I'm not sure if it's a product-only panel, but I did want to ask about services, exporting services.
No, it's not a product-only
Okay.
panel. And Nicholas's doors are open at JAMPRO, so he can speak to services too.
Okay, great. So my company does kind of like a BPO, but for podcasting. We take outsourced podcast services and do them here in Jamaica for clients in North America and Canada. We don't have any Spanish speakers, but we are thinking about expanding to Latin America. But what would be the pathway for someone who has services in terms of contacts, associations? Who do we talk to? Like what could the pathway be? Similar to how a clear pathway for products. Is there one for services?
I would have to know a little bit more about your business because I do a lot of work with attracting BPOs from Latin America to set up in Jamaica. So in terms of exporting your service, I'd have to understand a little better what are the exact services, what's your scalability. If you don't have native Spanish speakers, that's going to be a challenge, and that's a very important thing in your line of work for podcasts. Depending on the services you need, learning Spanish is great. You can spend 2 years learning, but native is a whole different category depending on the type of business you're doing. I spent 9 years in Colombia. I did my university degree in marketing management and political science in Spanish. I still have a very strong native Colombian accent. Somebody with 2 years, it really depends on the service you're offering. You can't do BPO with only 2 years, 3 years experience. The foreign accent is too heavy, and the nuances of moving too fast in a conversation with very complex matters, it really depends. As I said, with services, again, you could be doing software support where the language would not be that important. Giving app support, the language would not be that important. But when you're talking about podcasts, which I'm not as familiar with as the regular BPO, KPO industry, I would say that would be potentially a factor. You might want to look for a partner.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, looking
Out
for
of
a partner.
Panama to go and
Right.
look at an El Salvadorian customer, you know?
Yeah, so what would be the pathway? Like if I want to find a partner and build a team of Spanish speakers in one of the Latin countries to then export across the wider LATAM.
Well, that would be new for us, and that's a challenge we'd be willing to try and help you with.
And also coming out of this conference, Craig and the Adtelligent Group has created pretty much of a guideline blueprint for products and services and some of those pathways. So that's one of the benefits of having attended this conference, that you will have access to that. Okay?
And also, sorry, just to add, depending on where you want to go, the first place I would probably check is the embassy for that country. So for instance, if you want to go to the Dominican Republic, check with the embassy. They also have similar entities like JAMPRO, which would be the equivalent of a Pro Dominicano. You check with Pro Colombia. Depending on where you want to start, the first place of reference probably would be the embassy in Jamaica for that country.
Yes. Thank you, Jeffrey.
I mentioned at the beginning that we do some services in Latin America, and to give a sense of dimension, I would say our biggest activity in Latin America is service-based. I'll tell you about it in a second, but government definitely has its role, embassies, the JAMPROs, and their JAMPRO equivalents in other jurisdictions as well that look for opportunities to support investment and trade. But the trade show environment for a small or startup or medium-sized business can be quite a useful place. It's an investment of $1,500 to get on the ground and meet people and begin there. It'll help you to benchmark yourself against others, but also begin a process of formulating relationships. But just to give you a sense of what we do dimensionally in Latin America, now that we consider relatively core, is a business that we own 50-50 with a Dutch company. And the business is quite large. It has about 100 million pounds of turnover, so it's 18 billion J. So for those who watch our numbers, it only hits because it's a 50-50 deal at the associated company income line rather than the revenue line. And that business ships bananas from Colombia and from the Dominican Republic to Europe. So we own it, and we charter 5 ships, and the 5 ships go from Flushing or Rotterdam to Portsmouth to Eastern Caribbean, where they bring vehicles and consumer goods, down to Colombia, with the core cargo being bananas, and the Dominican Republic again with bananas and refrigerated cargo. But that business we bought in peak COVID, maybe 2021 or 2020, I've forgotten now to be precise. But we bought it literally on teams. And the nature of a shipping business is that you charter the ships from a company that charters ships to you. So you don't really need a lot of capital. But at the end of the day, it's a set of relationships. Because we had done business for many years in the Dominican Republic, including buying bananas from banana farmers, a wide range of banana farmers for snacks, but also for exports of fresh fruit, we knew the Domrep banana trade very well. And I knew I could go there and go farmer by farmer by farmer and say, come on board with us. So the business, essentially, its parent company went bankrupt, peak COVID, and we wanted to get into Latin America. The purchase price that the seller was willing to accept was 1.4 million pounds. So we needed each 700,000 pounds, 50-50 deal. But we managed to let the company that we were buying lend us 700,000 pounds in a little bit of financial engineering. So we're buying the company lent us the money to buy the company. And therefore we had to find the other 700,000 pounds, 350,000 pounds each. So we each wrote a check for 350,000 pounds for this company. The company is 100% relationships. You need to charter ships, and whoever you're chartering ships from needs to think that you can fill the ships and not go bankrupt. And then you need to get down to Colombia and get fruit, and get down to DR and get fruit, and then bring cargo back to the Eastern Caribbean. In the first year after buying the business, it made 8 million pounds of profit. Outstanding, kind of a one-of-a-kind lucky deal. You only get that kind of once in a lifetime. And it's continued to perform very well, and it's built up a lot of cash and so on and paid dividends. But at the end of the day, for it to come together required unambiguously this partner, which was a company called Seatrade, to join with us and know for sure that we were people of high integrity, that have been around business for a long time and don't plan to leave. That when we say we're going to do something together, COVID or no COVID, on Teams or otherwise, we're going to live up to our word. And then once we do the deal, we're going to get very, very physical, get very integrated with the customer base to hold on to it and grow together. And that's a once-in-a-lifetime story. But it does give a framework for what can be possible if you build those long-term relationships and a bit of a vision and keep that network that you develop close.
Thank you very much for that, Jeffrey. So we've heard a lot about building relationships, about collaboration, and that reputation that comes from the trust. As we are wrapping up, I'm going to start with you, Curtis, and we'll come down the line. What would you like to leave our business people with in their consideration of entering LATAM?
Okay, first thing you need to recognize is that it's not necessarily going to be easy. You have to be willing to put in the work. If you send one email, don't expect that you're going to get responded to. You have to follow up, and you just have to keep pushing, because it's not, I have friends here where I send them messages, they don't respond to me, let alone somebody that you don't know that you're sending a message to. And so it's just to know that you have to just keep pushing. And I mean, once you follow some of the tips that we've given here around finding the right persons, making the right connections, doing your homework, actually visiting the country to see, because that way you get probably a better insight to what you originally had in mind as to how you would enter. And I think with that, you know, you'd have a good blueprint for getting into the market.
Thanks, Curtis. Sydney.
I would say don't be afraid to fail. Not every market is the same. Not every product is built for every market. Not everyone you meet is going to be a long-term partner. So don't be afraid to fail. Approach it with a lot of diligence and caution. But at the end of the day, you know, it's like doing business everywhere else. You're gonna cut through until you find a product, a market, and a relationship that works with you.
Thanks, Sydney. Nicholas.
Thank you. I'm going to have an A and B answer. The first one, as Jeffrey highlighted, is trade shows, expos. That's where you'll find like-minded people and a very niche category, depending on your services, what type of services, what types of fast-moving consumer goods. And the second one is commit to the process. And this is what I learned when I was learning the export business at LASCO. When I opened Antigua, I booked my flight to Antigua a month before. And then I spent 2 weeks calling people in Antigua and said, look, I'm calling from LASCO. I'm going to be in Antigua at this time. I'd love to have a meeting with you at Tuesday at 9 o'clock. And I made 100 phone calls, and I got 9 meetings, and I found the distributor out of that 9. And that's something I've seen. John Mafu Jr., I'm going to highlight again. He called me and says, I'm going to Panama. I have a list of 10 distributors that I want to call. Can you give me a list of another 10? And I said, sure. And he said, okay, great, and I'm coming to your office tomorrow, so you can call them for me, because you speak Spanish, to get past the receptionist. And John had committed to the time. So when I was helping him make the calls, Mr. Mahfoud is going to be there at 9:30 on Wednesday. Commit to it, and you will find success. Hopefully you'll find success, but it's the commitment that has led to the success of companies like Caribbean Teas, like LASCO, like Grace. Commit to the process.
Thanks, Nicholas. Jeffrey, you have the final word.
I have to find something new to say, right?
Yeah, man.
I would say to kind of be meticulous about the trade. You know, when you look at people who are likely to come into this market, and from Latin America, let's say, and you now see them present on the shelves of the supermarkets here, there's a high probability that some entrepreneur caught the plane, came to Jamaica and Copa, and obsessed over the market differences, held up the thing. You probably see them in, high-low or progressive, looking at the packaging, look at the competition, looking to see what else is on the shelf, trying to understand the route to market, trying to understand the distributor margin, trying to understand the logistics costs. It's obsessive of the details. Because for every positive story that I tell you about my life, I can probably give you a negative story. I mean, when we went into the DR on the sell side of what would have been the Spanish language equivalent of St. Mary's, we had an assumption that the way we were doing St. Mary's at that point, which was the early 2000s, essentially, as Neil Crumewing would know, we would basically get a van man to go down to Princess Street, broadly defined, and discharge a large volume of snacks, and then they would make their way to the trade, one or another, with various margins being tacked on along the way. So we said, okay, let's go to the DR, find out where is the equivalent of the kind of dense market community in downtown Santo Domingo, get a little warehouse, fly the gate and drop the price and hope the thing moves. And the reality is that the DR, like many Latin American countries, the trade is just structurally different than Jamaica. It just cannot work that way. And you will not be able to sell snacks by hoping that wholesalers will buy and vendors will sell and so on. And so I would say a lesson is to obsess over the differentiating details of the trade and enjoy the process.
Enjoy the process. So we've heard we need to push through. We cannot be afraid to fail on this journey. We can't discount attending these types of events, the trade shows, the expos. Commit to the process and be meticulous about the trade. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a round of applause as we thank our panel, Jeffrey Hall, CEO of the Panjam Group, Nicholas Sutherland, Manager New Market Development at Jampro, Sydney Thwaites, CEO Lubricating Specialties Company, Jamaica, and Curtis McDowell, Independent Consultant. Give them another round of applause, and thank you very much, gentlemen.